Hey Psychology. So we are starting our first introduction, our first video, our first bit of information for our unit on sensation and perception. So this should be a short little video with some important notes and some important terms. So let's go ahead and get started. We're looking at. So we need to look at two different terms here, and this is what we're going to be breaking down over the next couple of videos. But first off, we're going to look at the term sensation. So if you think of the process using that image that you just saw, what sensation really is, it's that process that we use of constructing mental representations of the external world. Okay, it's the process of taking in mental representations. So to represent the world, we have to have some type of physical energy, and that is a stimulus. So we take in and detect a stimulus from the environment, and then we convert it into neurosignals. So we take in that stimulus using our senses. So what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we feel, we take that information in, and then our brain converts it into neurosignals. And this is the process that we call sensation. And then when we select and organize and interpret that sensation, that becomes our perception. So we are learning in this unit, we're learning about sensation, all of that physical energy that we convert into neurosignals, and then how we interpret and organize all of that information and those sensations. And that is our perception. So sensation and perception. So again, with these images here, what do you sense? Or more specifically, what do you see in those two pictures? We're going to come back to that in just a couple of slides. So the first term in this is what's called bottom-up processing. And bottom-up processing is the analysis of the stimulus. It begins with your sense receptors and works up to the level of the brain and mind. So if you put this in simpler, easier to understand language, okay, we take in that stimulus and our sense receptors, we gotta just take it for what it is. What do we see? What do we hear? It is the bottom level. And based on that information, then it heads to our brain and our mind, and we're able to figure it out. So we take in that stimulus and we literally ask ourselves, our brain processes information. What is this? What do I see? What do I hear? So given that, which of the following is the American flag? So using bottom-up processing, you know that the American flag is red, white, and blue. So because you have those, you use the stimulus of the flags and your sense receptors, you can figure it out from the bottom, the basic information. A flag, the American flag is red, white, and blue. You know that the flag is the one in the middle. That is bottom-up processing. On the flip side, top-down processing. So if you're at the top, you are, you're doing pretty well. You are maybe a little bit more mature. You have some experience. So top-down processing is where information processing is guided by higher level mental processes. And you use those as you construct perceptions that draw on your experience and your expectations. And that's the key. Top-down processing is where you are using information that you already have. You are synthesizing, you are pulling together, you are considering all of the experiences that you have to interpret and decide what you are perceiving. So if you look at that statement there in black, can you read what that sentence is saying? Let's go back. So you absolutely can. The reason you can fill in the blanks for that sentence, you can read this sentence, right? That's top-down processing. You can fill in those gaps, top-down processing. So which did you use for the polar bear in determining what you see there? Are you using bottom-up processing or top-down processing? I don't know. It could depend. Some of you, some of you are going to say you see a polar bear, and that maybe this is a holiday bear. He's got that nice red scarf. But depending on your experience and your mindset and where your thinking lies, some of you might actually see this as an image that is making a statement about animal rights. Whew, that's a stretch maybe, but that would be top-down processing. Bottom up, I see this white animal. It looks like there's a drawing of a nose and it's got a nice scarf. You know, this is a nice holiday, dressed up holiday polar bear. But taking it a step further, given your experience, that would be using top-down processing. We'll go over this a little bit more in class in just a couple of days. So the next thing we need to look at in terms of sensation are what's referred to as our thresholds. And there's a few different concepts here. They're very much alike, but very different. So you need to be sure that you can differentiate the two. So our absolute threshold, this is the minimum stimulation that's needed to detect a particular stimulus 50% of the time. So an absolute threshold is really how much sound, how much light, how much of a smell do you need to identify that stimulus at least 50% of the time. Okay, and when you smell something, when you hear something, then that becomes your threshold. That's the moment in time where you can interpret that sound, that sight. That is your absolute threshold. The minimum stimulation needed to detect a particular stimulus 50% of the time. Now the next term here is called difference threshold, and sometimes it's also called just noticeable difference. Difference threshold, just noticeable difference. They're the same thing. The stimulus is already existing, but the difference threshold is the minimum difference between two stimuli required for detection 50% of the time. So how much do you have to turn your music up or down in order to hear the difference? How bright do the lights have to be? Or how bright do you have to make them before you detect a difference? Okay, that is the difference threshold, or the just noticeable difference. So when we talk about just noticeable difference, there's a law called Weber's law, and it states that the size of the just noticeable difference is proportional to the intensity of the stimulus. The size of the just noticeable difference is proportional to the intensity of the stimulus. So if the stimulus intensity is really, really high. The lights are really bright. The music is really loud. You're being pressed on really, really hard. Okay, it's a high intensity. It will take a bigger change for you to notice the difference. Those lights are going to have to be dimmed quite a bit before you notice the difference. You're really going to have to turn the music down quite a bit or turn it up quite a bit in order for you to tell a difference if the stimulus intensity is high. If the stimulus intensity is low, then it will take a smaller change, a lower change, for you to notice the difference. If the volume is really low, you're not going to have to increase the volume very much for you to hear that difference. And that's Weber's law. So we are going to take a look at this video clip here in class together, and we'll play out and you can see what Weber's law is all about. So this is kind of a fun idea, but it's a real thing. So when we talk about subliminal thresholds, or you may know them more as subliminal messages, and that is when the stimuli are below your absolute threshold for conscious awareness. Okay? Things are happening that you really aren't consciously perceiving. So in other words, most things are not consciously detected. However, it's possible you could notice some of these items. And so these subliminal messages pop up in movies. There's a lot of people that believe that subliminal messages are included in a lot of songs. But studies have found that subliminal words that flash briefly on a screen can actually prime your response. So while something may not have made a big impact on you, just the little bit of power of suggestion there, that subliminal message, it can impact your response later on. So again, something that we'll play with and take a look at more in detail when we get to class. So the last concept for us in this video is what's called signal detection theory. And this is something that I think all of you have seen played out in your own lives. But what it means simply is that our thresholds are not absolute, that they can change. So the signal detection theory predicts how and when we detect the presence of a stimulus, even amid background noise or other stimulation. And what it assumes that there is no single absolute threshold, and that for you to detect a signal, for you to hear the message, it's going to depend on your experience, your expectations, your motivation, how tired you are. So I think to give you an example, you'll understand more clearly what signal detection theory is all about. So let's say that you are a musician and you practice your guitar and you play and you play and you play and it's loud and you don't hear your phone messaging you, and you play and you play and you play, and then your mom is shouting out at you, hey, it's time for dinner, come down and eat, and you play and you play and you play, and you just keep going, and you don't detect any of those other signals, okay, because there's nobody important that's going to call me. I'm really not motivated. I don't care. I'm not hungry. I'm not going to listen to my mom. I am playing my guitar. But then that cute girl from your, your AP psychology class is going to call you, or she's going to FaceTime you. Suddenly, you're playing your guitar, and now your motivation is really different. And now in your brain, you have decided, I am going to pay attention and I am going to be able to detect that stimulus because I am motivated to detect some of those other signals. That's basically the idea of signal detection theory. So finally, you'll relate to this sensory adaptation. When our senses adapt, and that's really what this is. But you got to use different vocabulary for an FRQ. So sensory adaptation is your diminished sensitivity as a consequence of constant stimulation. So you light a candle. Oh, it smells really good. And then 15 minutes later, you can't smell it anymore. You're at a concert and the band starts playing and oh, it's so loud. And then after a while, it's not loud anymore. That is sensory adaptation. Most of you, as I'm talking here, you wouldn't even be aware that you've got clothes on because you don't think about it. Okay, you put them on, and if you're cold, you put on a jacket, and then you don't think about it anymore. You jump in a pool, it's freezing, and then sensory adaptation happens, and you don't think about it anymore. All right, the arrow means we are done with this video. So we will follow up in class on some of these concepts, and we'll keep going in our next video.